Welcome to the Sunday worship service of the First Church in Boston, a Unitarian Universalist congregation in the Back Bay. Today's service features Reverend Edmund Robinson, Interim Minister. His sermon is entitled, Love One a Mother, in honor of today being Mother's Day.
Good morning. Welcome to the First Church in Boston. We call it Boston's oldest church. Sometimes we call it Boston's newest church. Sometimes we call it Boston's grooviest church. You'll have to, if you're not sitting here now, you'll have to come down here to figure out what's going on with that appellation. But welcome to all those who are watching us on Facebook. And remember that you can see the services long after they have been recorded on Facebook if you miss anything. But we hope you don't miss anything. We'd like to have you right down here. It's Mother's Day. What a great day for a Mother's Day. The sun is shining. The temperature couldn't be better. So I want to open with Mother's Day with the Mother's Day Proclamation 573 in the back of your hymnal. This is by Julia Ward Howe. It's a great paean to peace by the woman who brought you the most martial song of the Civil War. Julia Howe, of course, will not disturb any of you to know that she was a Unitarian. And this is her attempt about 6 years after the Civil War to try to call together a peace conclave for all the women that had lost people in the war. Arise, all women who have hearts, whether your baptism be that of water or of fears. Say firmly, we will not have great questions decided by irrelevant agencies. Our husbands shall not come to us reeking with carnage for caresses and applause. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. We women of one country will be too tender of those of another country to allow our sons to be trained to injure theirs. From the bosom of the devastated earth, a voice goes up with our own. It says, disarm, disarm. The sword of murder is not the balance of justice. Blood does not wipe out dishonor, nor violence indicate possession. As men have often forsaken the plow and the anvil at the summons of war, let women now leave all that may be left of home for a great and earnest day of council. Let them meet first as women to bewail and commemorate the dead. Let them then solemnly take counsel with each other as the means whereby the great human family can live in peace, and each bearing after her own time the sacred impress, not of Caesar, but of God. Our opening hymn, number 23, Bring Many Names.
Bring many names.
Thank you. Please be seated. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together. The words of Christine Robinson, no relation to me. And we now come to the First Church Boston affirmation, which I invite you to rise as you are able to say in unison as we do every Sunday. Love is the spirit of this church, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Thank you. Please be seated. Announcements. We have an announcement about the plate.
Good morning, everyone. Today is Mother's Day. I love that reading that Edmund read from Julia Ward Howe. Our sons shall not be taken from us to unlearn all that we have been able to teach them of charity, mercy, and patience. Well, our plate collection today is going to support two community groups. One is our longtime community partner, the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, and the second is the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute, which is located here in the Boston neighborhood of Fields Corner in Dorchester. The Peace Institute was founded in 1994 by Joseph and Clementina Cherry, whose son was murdered in a crossfire incident the previous year on a street near their home in Dorchester while he was on his way to a meeting opposing gang violence. The Institute was founded to be a center for healing, teaching, and learning for families and communities impacted by murder, trauma, grief, and loss. 2 years after the Institute's founding, the Mother's Day Walk for Peace was begun by the Peace Institute's president and CEO, Clementina Cherry, and she created this walk for the mothers of murdered children so that on this day, they experience support and love from their neighbors. And now, 27 years later, this tradition continues as a powerful way to honor loved ones who have been murdered and their families, and also to embrace our shared responsibility for peacemaking. This morning already, thousands of community members walked alongside families that have lost loved ones to homicide, letting them know they're not alone in their healing journey. And among these thousands were our First Church members, Joanne Quass, Pam Steele, and Susan and Denali Weaver. Thank you, Joanne, Pam, Susan, and Denali. Here is a little piece of the Peace Institute statement about the theme of this year's walk, which is cultivating cycles of peace. In our society, we are constantly looped into cycles of violence that overshadow the transformative power of peace. Like a blooming flower, cycles of peace flourish when carefully cultivated. We have the agency to cultivate these cycles by empowering survivors, supporting returning citizens and their families, and investing in Generation Peace. One more thing about the Louis D. Brown Institute. It has an interfaith statement of support, which includes inputs from Buddhism, Christianity, humanism, Hinduism, Islam, Judaism, and Unitarian Universalism. It reads, "We, religious leaders, organizations, and clergy representing different religious traditions affirm," some of these will sound familiar, "the sacred worth and dignity of each person. We affirm that one life lost to homicide is one life too many, that a unified religious voice is urgently needed, that the golden rule embedded in all world religions compels us to act toward others as we would wish they would act toward us, with love and compassion, and lastly, that peace is foundational within each of our respective religious traditions. Please give generously today to support both of these dynamic and inspiring organizations, our longtime community partner, the Mass Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence, and the Louis D. Brown Peace Institute. Thank you.
In other announcements, this is a big transitional time in this congregation. Of course, the main part of the transition you've already done, and I want to congratulate you on coming together unanimously in favor of our next minister. That is so unusual for a UU congregation. That's another U, Unitarian Universalist Unanimous. And I can't believe that we actually achieved it, but of course, the search committee deserves so much of the credit. They have worked so hard to bring us to this moment. So the rest of the stuff is sort of automatic from that. We do have an annual meeting come up next week. At that annual meeting, the new board will be elected, the standing committee, which will decide what exact things we do in the next few weeks. In the next few weeks, I will be wrapping up my interim ministry here. I am in conversation with several congregations. If they want another interim minister, I tell them to look to you guys and see how I did. But also, there may be other things that I have ahead for me. Who knows? So that's all the announcements that I have, I believe. And that brings us to the sharing of joys and concerns. And after the sharing of joys and concerns, we're going to have a special thing for Mother's Day. If anyone wants to participate in it, we'll have you come up, say the name of your mother into the silence, and take a carnation if the carnations last. So. Thank you. Somehow I sort of lose track right at the middle of the service, 7:15. Khalil Gibran. Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come from you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you, for life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite and bends you with might that the arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness. I'll put a stone in for my own fortunes in the next couple of weeks. Here's hoping that I get a church that I like as much as I like this one.
Good morning. Let me see. First of all, I want to say how much we have enjoyed you, Edmund, and I'm sure I speak for many of us here when I say we're going to really miss you. When I say that we're really going to miss you and how much we've appreciated your 2 years that you have given this place. It's really been wonderful years. I am thinking about my mother, Catherine Powers. She raised 7 children. I was one in the middle, and we had a great time. Rocky start as a teenager, but as a grown man, I knew that I had somebody special. So, Mom, God bless you wherever you are. Thank you.
Just a note on this mic, it really changes very much from this to this, so try to keep it pointed straight into your mouth. This particular mic is a peculiarity like that. And right now we're on joys and concerns other than your mother, so let's keep it to that, and then we'll go into mothering.
My joy is for my niece, my niece Caitlin, who was just pinned as a nurse, and she got her job of her dreams, and she'll be a pediatric ICU nurse at Yale New Haven Hospital. And so it was lovely I wasn't able to go, but it was great to see the pictures. And also, sorry, I'm going to break your rule very quickly. She held up a picture of my mother, who was a nurse as well, so that was very lovely.
What are rules for but to be broken? David.
Thank you. I'd like to, forgive me, I've got some very bad hay fever. Hope you can hear me. I would say, thanks to my mother, without whom I wouldn't be, and for all the mothers everywhere, and my mother was a nurse, Maud Olivia Muchler-Reno, RN, and I may have said this before, so if I'm repeating myself, please don't fall asleep. It has occurred to me, interesting thing about words, it is said when a woman gives birth, she goes through labor. I would like someone to explain to me why, if that's considered labor, raising children for 18 to 20 years is not labor, and why we don't subsidize it. But that's me, I'm a bit of an eccentric.
I actually had 2 wonderful mothers, one in the form of a grandmother who everyone called Thoroughly Modern Millie, and also my mother, who was a little bit more proper, Shirley Sunny Beck.
One of my biggest joys is being here today. I grew up as a Unitarian in the suburbs of Boston here, and I don't get back here much because I live in the White Mountains. But I just find so much peace in the words of Unitarianism and the spirituality, and it gives me great strength. My daughter graduated from college yesterday. That's my main joy. And it was especially amazing because our son was 3 years older than her and would be 28 now, but he passed away in an avalanche 8 years ago as a U.S. ski team member. And we have an avalanche safety program online, which is BRASS, B-R-A-S-S, avalanche.org. If anybody has skier friends, they should send them to that website. There's free avalanche education. But because missing our son, it was especially wonderful that our daughter graduated. Thank you.
And Cindy was nice enough to send me an email before she came just to tell me that she would be here. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you. Come back anytime. Anyone else? Okay, let's move into phase 2 then. And I see this as just This is a revival of an old custom from my childhood, where on Mother's Day, almost everybody came to church with either a white or a red carnation as a boutonniere. White if your mother was deceased, and red if she was still living. So we bought some white and red, but of course your UUs, you can make them mean whatever you want them to mean. And then there's some instructions that Juliana has put out on a clipboard. If you want to make yours into a boutonniere, we have the scissors and the pins to do it. But you don't have to come up or say anything. Nobody's making you do anything. But if you want to come up and say your mother's name, this is the time to do it. And take a carnation if you so desire.
This will be the first Mother's Day without my mother, so take this in remembrance of Carmela Brinkley.
Gosh, it's been 22 years since my mother died, and my mother's name is Ruth, and she still lives in me, and she was so lively. Anyway, thank you, Ruth, Mommy.
My mother's name was Ruth Porter Martin, and I think the last place she ever went was her UU church in Knoxville, Tennessee, 8 years ago.
It's funny, I didn't think I'd get choked up. It's been a long time. My mother was Ann Lloyd Elders. She was a wonderful mother, and she was really my very best friend until she passed away.
This is for two mothers, my mother, Virginia Mary Stearns, and also for a mother who walked today for her son, Deborah, and she walked for her son, Drew.
I am blessed to still have my mother with us at age 95, Joan Davis Collins.
We are all blessed.
Thank you. My mother was also Ruth Freeman Grover Wright, and she was wonderful.
Thank you. My mother was Margaret Rosemary Olivia Anderson Snap. And she so much enjoyed in her last years coming here to First Church of Boston.
My mom is Susan Camille, who lives in Pennsylvania but always watches the live stream. And I just got to see her last week, or I just got to see her a few days ago, so that was great.
Hi, I had to come forward because my mother's name was Ruth, and her name used to be on the wall. I haven't checked. Ruth Marie Fuller McGowan. She wanted her full name on the wall.
Sure.
I'm just a visitor, but the chain of Ruths, I have to get up. My mother's name was Ruth McGill Blumenthal, and like some of the other mothers, she was an RN, and she was a deacon at All Souls Unitarian Church in New York.
Take a flower.
Well, I wasn't going to get up at all, but my mother's name was Wida Ruth Mitchell, Hendon Mitchell. I just want to say that I also want to honor my husband's mother, Leonila, who was the nicest, kindest person I think I've ever met. And she accepted me immediately. She accepted me immediately. She knew that it was right. She saw how right it was. But to those of you who don't come up and don't feel like you had a relationship with your mother, you have a mother somewhere in your life. You have someone that you loved. You have someone that loved you, that nurtured you. And that's really what it's about. It's about the nurturing, the loving. And there are dog moms. That's important. So I am going to take this one because both Leonila and Wida are passed.
I guess that means that as a congregation, as it sits right now, we're essentially ruthless. So I'll say, send off to my mother she's been gone for 12, 13 years now. But if I just say her name, that'll be all the rest of the service. Elizabeth Courtney Haywood Robinson Boykin Clarkson. I'll ask Barbara Martin to come forward and give us the sermon reading.
The Lanyard by Billy Collins. The other day I was ricocheting slowly off the blue walls of this room, moving as if underwater from typewriter to piano, from bookshelf to an envelope lying on the floor, when I found myself in the L section of the dictionary, where my eyes fell upon the word lanyard. No cookie nibbled by a French novelist could send one into the past more suddenly. A past where I sat at a workbench at a camp by a deep Adirondack lake, learning how to braid long, thin plastic strips into a lanyard, a gift for my mother. I had never seen anyone use a lanyard or wear one, if that's what you did with them, but that did not keep me from crossing strand over strand again and again until I had made a boxy red and white lanyard for my mother. She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room and lifted spoons of medicine to my lips, laid cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim, and I, in turn, presented her with a lanyard. Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here is clothing and a good education. And here is your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones, and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. And here, I wish to say to her now, is a smaller gift. Not the worn truth that you can never repay your mother, but the rueful admission that when she took the 2-tone lanyard from my hand, I was as sure as a boy could be that this useless, worthless thing I wove out of boredom would be enough to make us even.
The sermon hymn is Bright Morning Stars, number 357. The choir is going to sing the first verse once, and then we're all going to sing it together from there on.
Bright
Thank you. Please be seated. Love one a mother. I want to start by inviting you to sit comfortably in your seats and close your eyes and try to re-experience a time we know we experienced, even though we can't remember it. The liquid warmth of the womb, the darkness, the comfortable sloshing back and forth as our mother went through her normal daily motions. Can we feel the absolute security of this place? Can we hear the sound, mother's heartbeat just a few inches from our ears, from the time ears were forming, steady, reassuring, the first rhythm and the basis for all life's rhythms that came after. And then one day, the world turned upside down and our home was convulsed with great shaking and squeezing, and our little heads were compressed and we were stuck in a very tight place for a very long time. And just when it seemed we weren't going to make it, suddenly we opened our eyes and there was light and air for the first time and noise other than the heartbeat, and we were terrified, and we sucked that air in to let out the biggest scream we could. Ah! Go ahead, cry. It seems the only appropriate response to the trauma we had just suffered, the greatest most of us would ever suffer. And the only thing that would comfort us in those first few minutes on the outside was to spend time clinging to the person we had just been inside of, feeling her warmth and softness and hearing that reassuring heartbeat. And our mother responded to this. She pretty much had to. As soon as the birth was complete, a powerful hormone called oxytocin started coursing through her veins, and it's like love potion number 9. She falls in love with her baby, and by coincidence, her baby needs her to fall in love because human babies are helpless for a longer period of time after birth than any other animal. So evolution has taken care of this problem and given us chemical-based mother love. This is the setup that nature provides. We honor our mothers today because it is in the nature of things that we start life with an intimacy with them more total and more physical than we ever have again with another human being. You may live with a spouse or lover for 60 years. You will never get as close to him or her as you got to your mother in the first 9 months. This intimacy is the point at which I want to start today. But I don't want to get all Hallmark card sentimental. The topic of motherhood is here in the 21st century is not all apple pie. First and most obviously, not all of us have been or will be mothers. Some of us, like myself, are disqualified by our plumbing, and others of us will have simply taken other directions in life. I want to honor non-motherhood as a noble path, and to acknowledge that women who have not had children sometimes feel very out in the cold in a discussion of mothers. Second, every one of us has had some degree of conflict with our real mothers, either in childhood, adolescence, or as an adult. And some of us hold permanent scars from this. It will not do to simply lift up the cheery aspects of motherhood without mentioning the shadow side. There is so much sentimental blather in the air at this time of day that we may suspect that Mother's Day is a conspiracy of the greeting card companies, the florists, the chocolatiers, the restaurants, and the public radio stations. We forget that it was a Unitarian activist in the 19th century, Julia Ward Howe, that started this observance, a day when women were supposed to rise up and put an end to war. Actually, Julia Howe did not get very far in establishing Mother's Day. It was another person about 20, 30 years later. Of course, Julia Howe did not exactly put an end to war. Maybe what has come to an end is the idea that women are inherently more peaceful. But what I want to focus on today is the theology of motherhood. When we are in the womb, our mothers are our total environment. We started as a part of her body. In those early weeks, there was no me in her. It was all her. Even after birth, we did not differentiate ourselves from the rest of the world until we learned to recognize our mother's face. Our mothers then are, in a sense, the ground of our being. There are many things we choose in life, so many things that we sometimes forget that the biggest things are things we didn't choose, but which were chosen for us. To be born at all, and to be born to this particular set of parents in this particular time is just a given, not a choice. Now, what does this have to do with theology? Just this. I think our mothers stand as a symbol for the larger force or entity to which we owe our existence, from which we sprung. The source of our very existence, or as Tillich called it, the ground of our being. Some will choose to call this ground of being God. Some will call it spirit. Some may call it fate or karma. Some will call it the world. And for many of us, it will simply be unnamed. The essential point is that there is something other and larger than ourselves, something prior to our own existences, something we did not choose, but which in some sense chose us. We often go around ignoring this larger context. Buddhists are fond of using the metaphor of fish. The fish do not see the water, for they are so embedded in it. We do not see the larger medium in which we live and move and have our being, but it is to us like our mother once was. She was everything, and she was so pervasive that we grew up largely in ignorance of how much we owe her. And in this vision of motherhood is unconditional love. I don't want to just use mothers as a symbol of divinity. I want to use oxytocin to stand for divine love, the love that binds us one to another. Or as I say in my title, love one a mother. What was Jesus' distillation of all the law and the prophets? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. With oxytocin, a mother can't help loving her baby as herself. Oxytocin, by the way, is not the sole property of females. It is found in the blood of male birds when they are sitting on a nest. It is the chemical expression of the nurturing instinct. In the poem that Barbara read earlier, Billy Collins said, "She gave me life and milk from her breasts, and I gave her a lanyard. She nursed me in many a sick room, lifted spoons of medicine to my lips, laid cold face cloths on my forehead, and then led me out into the airy light and taught me to walk and swim, and I, in turn, presented her with a lanyard." Here are thousands of meals, she said, and here's clothing and a good education. And here's your lanyard, I replied, which I made with a little help from a counselor. Here is a breathing body and a beating heart, strong legs, bones and teeth, and 2 clear eyes to read the world, she whispered. And here, I said, is the lanyard I made at camp. I think religious liberals tend to get stuck in the lanyard mentality. We don't know what to call that which gave us our being, that from which we are derived. We don't, by and large, give any weight to the stories in the Bible, and we believe in the insights of modern science. And somehow we let that be a substitute for Thanksgiving. This congregation defines itself as humanist, and if humanism means that we believe in putting humans first, I'm in there too. But if our intellectual agnosticism or atheism is an excuse to live life in ignorance of our debt to forces, to things and forces outside ourselves that have bestowed, are bestowing, and will continue to bestow blessings on us, we're living in spiritual poverty. Not only that, we're living in delusion if we think that all this came about through our own actions. Through much of the 20th century, many Unitarian churches used an affirmation written by James Freeman Clarke in 1886 as 5 points of Unitarian faith: the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus, salvation by character, and the continuity of human development in all worlds, or the progress of mankind onward and upward forever. Some wag parody this affirmation by saying that Unitarians believe in three things: the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, and the neighborhood of Boston. But let me first just focus on this first idea, the fatherhood of God. That is not particularly remarkable in the light of Christian theology, for God the Father is the first person of the Trinity. Jesus himself refers to God as his Father and the Father of all humanity. Orthodox Christian theology holds that Jesus was divine. In his divine aspect, he is referred to as the Logos. The Logos, one part of the Trinity, becomes incarnated in the human Jesus. The word incarnated means to be made flesh. In the Gospel of John, it says, the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. Now, the idea of a God being made flesh does not begin with the Christians. Ancient religions are full of tales of immortals interacting and interbreeding with humans. You may know of the Greek myth of Leda, who was raped by the god Zeus in the form of a swan and produced two immortal children, Helen and Polydeuces. In the case of Jesus, the immortal agent does not rape Mary, but immaculately impregnates her. And in traditional thinking, the agent doing the impregnating is not God the Father, but the Holy Spirit, the third person of the Trinity. Mary is fully human, but in Catholic thought takes on some aspects of a divine mother. The meaning of divine fatherhood was further fleshed out by the Council of Nicaea in 325. The question they set out to answer was, is the Logos the second person of the Trinity, the Son of God the Father, or was he made by God the Father, who after all made everything else? The answer was that he was the Son, or as the Nicene Creed says it, begotten, not made. This is an important distinction. One makes a sculpture, painting, or poem. One builds a building or lays out a road or farm, but one begets a child. And I think the distinction is more profound if we flip the sex roles and talk about mothering instead of fathering. We all make things. We make lanyards. We make pies. We make money. We make a career. We make a scene, but we don't make a person. Some of us bear a person. Some of us birth a person. Some of us raise a person. Some of us beget a person. This is why the lanyard is so pathetic in the poem. What is a few twisted strands of plastic braid against the gift of life itself? The poet does a wonderful job of painting this, oh so comically as he does in so many ways for us. But to get back to theology, where I think Orthodox Christianity went off the rails was not in saying that Jesus was God, but in saying that the rest of us were not. The Gospel of Thomas strongly hints what Emerson in his Divinity School address intuited a century before its discovery, that Jesus preached that all of us had a divine light in us. We're all children of a divine Father, or as I would like to say today, a divine mother. Emerson said the great perversion of the Spirit was, quote, that the divine nature is attributed to one or two persons and denied to all the rest, and denied with fury, end quote. If we are all children of a divine mother, that makes us all sisters and brothers. So the second article of Clarke's Unitarian affirmation of faith proceeds from the first. Now, clearly this language is inadequate. It's suffused with patriarchy, since it was originally expressed in male terms. Okay, it was patriarchal. Does that mean it cannot be translated? I'd like to think that the concept is not so infected with oppressive attitudes of the time in which it was written that some nugget of truth may not be mined from it to help us in our lives today. Think about the idea of universal siblinghood. I've preached on love and Darwinism. Darwinian evolution, as it used to be understood, would give us all the tendency to protect our own kin, anyone who might be carrying our genes or those of a close relative. If the overall idea is to propagate your own lineage, we should be protective of our tribe and killing off all the others. But today's evolutionary scientists are very impressed by the fact that we have such keenly attuned social skills that we have the ability to read each other's minds to some extent. After all, since humans are capable of killing one another, the biggest threat to any individual's existence is not larger or fiercer animals, but other humans. Thus, it's a handy thing for survival to have the ability to walk into a group of people and read the body language, facial expression, and smell, and determine with some accuracy whether you're going to be welcomed into that group or killed there. Eventually, those social skills evolved into religions, which taught the value of love and extended the circle of kinship out to all humans. I've sung this African American Christmas carol before. I think it expresses this universalist idea rather nicely. If anybody asks you who I am, who I am, who I am. If anybody asks you who I am, tell them I'm a child of God. The other day, as we welcomed a new member into this church, we reminded ourselves that our church is built on covenant. Covenant is the glue that holds together a church which is not based on shared theological belief. It is the sum of all reasons why we come together. And as such, it can't be expressed in any finite set of words. But the religious meaning of the term covenant is informed by its history in the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible is basically the story of the covenant between God and God's chosen people, the Israelites. In the Torah, there are several covenants that God makes, one with Noah, 3 with Abraham, and 1 with Moses. Now, there's an interesting thing about the text which expresses one of the covenants with Abram. It occurs in the story of the first of these covenants in Genesis 19, when God, in the form of 3 strangers, visits Abram and his wife Sarai. Abram and Sarah both underwent name changes as they became part of the covenant. Sarai is barren and is in her 90s, and yet God promises that she shall bear a son, and out of that son shall come a great nation. Sarai, in other words, will be a super mother. Her reaction? She falls down laughing, which is why the son she then has is named Isaac, which means laughter. But what is remarkable is the word used for God. In most of Genesis, God is designated by JHVH, Yahweh, or Elohim. In this passage, the term El Shaddai is used, and it's used only a few more times in the Hebrew Bible. El is the Semitic word for God, and Elohim is the more usual term for God. Shaddai literally means mountains, so El Shaddai would mean God of the mountains. But some commentators have known that the term Shaddai is similar to Hebrew Shaddayim, which is breasts, and thus read El Shaddai as God of the breasts. In other words, a mother figure. This reading is disputed by others. Personally, I like the idea of a maternal God giving the covenant on which the Jewish people is founded. One commentator says that while the breast etymology is weak, the name El Shaddai does imply that God is all-sufficient, as the mother's milk is all-sufficient for the newborn child. The point I'm trying to make is that covenant in its oldest religious meanings has overtones of maternal nurturance. The original glue that bound the children of Abram was given by God El Shaddai. In this church, we no longer conceive of covenant as between God and humans, but as between humans and humans in the institution of the church. But we can hold each other in unconditional love as a mother holds a child. We can find some spiritual oxytocin. Let me try to bring these disparate strands to some sort of conclusion with reference to my own life. A few weeks ago, I came across some letters my father wrote my mother when he was stationed in Italy in World War II. They had gotten married a year before the war broke out, and my oldest brother had been born just before my dad shipped out for North Africa. My father had to pull some strings to get a short leave so he could come see his son at least once before going off to war. In the letters, my dad referred repeatedly to my mother as Hudi, H-U-D-I. I remembered from my early childhood that both of them used this term of endearment for the other. In one letter, Dad assured Mother of his continuing love for her, that all he wanted was to stay alive long enough to see his Hudi again. I was fascinated and a bit embarrassed to be eavesdropping on such intimate correspondence. Of course, they wanted to keep the marriage alive, and I'm glad they did, for I was born 3 years after the war ended. But where did the term come from? I knew that this term had something to do with the famous violinist Yehudi Menuhin, but I didn't know exactly how. Go to Wikipedia. Wikipedia answers all questions. If Wikipedia is right, Menuhin was born in 1916, the same year as my father, to a pair of Jewish refugees who had come to New York from Lithuania. A few years earlier, as the parents looked for a place to live, they were shown an apartment in Brooklyn by a landlady who promised them that she did not rent to Jews. Menuhin's mother, of course, protested that they were in fact Jewish, and they didn't rent that apartment. But the violinist's mother carried that experience of anti-Semitism in her heart, and when her first son was born, she named him a name, which means simply the Jew, turning that fact into a matter of pride. Yehudi Menuhin, of course, as you may know, turned out to be a musical prodigy, and before he had reached his teens, was playing with symphony orchestras across the country. In those days, the comedian Bob Hope had a weekly radio show that was broadcast nationwide. One of the zaniest of his sidemen was an actor and comedian from Boston named Jerry Colonna. Apparently, the violin prodigy Yehudi Menuhin was to be a guest on Bob Hope's show, and Jerry Colonna decided to make his unusual name the theme of a running joke. "Who's Yehudi?" became one of Colonna's most memorable lines, hinting at some hidden identity. How and when my mom and dad got together is documented in some photos in an old album. It was a house party in 1939. There's a photo of my dad leaning against the car between two women, my mother and Harriet, one of her best friends. I like to reflect that if Dad had been more attracted to Harriet than my mother, I would not be here. I don't know the details on how my parents came to adopt this running joke from the Bob Hope show into their most intimate term of affection for each other, and anyone I could ask has now passed on to the other side. But this joke, which we see today has more than a whiff of anti-Semitism, was one of the strands which held this young married couple together over 3 years of warfare. It is part of the series of events which led to the births of me and my siblings. Who's Yehudi? It sounds so inane today, but it was the foundation of a love to which I owe my very existence. And I imagine that each person hearing these words has stories like this. The love between two young people tossed about on the seas of wartime fate turns into a mother's love when the war is over. We are all mothers. We are all babies. Each of us is enwombed in the covenanted body that is this church, and each of us is the womb as well. Let us continue to nurture one another. Happy Mother's Day. Amen. Now let us have an offering for the advancement of this church.
If you'd like to support the work of this church with a financial donation, you may write out a check to First Church Boston and mail it to 66 Marlborough Street, 02116. You can also donate via text. Simply text the dollar amount, 5, 10, 20, etc., to 617-917-5610. You will receive confirmation by email. Thank you.
invite you to join us in extinguishing the chalice with the words in your order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. Our closing hymn is number 126. Go in peace, be of good mettle, hold fast to that which is true, render to no person evil for evil, strengthen the faint-hearted, support the weak, help the afflicted. Amen.
Please feel free to join us live each Sunday at 66 Marlborough Street at the corner of Berkeley Street in Back Bay. If you would like more information about programs, services, or membership at First Church, please visit the website www.firstchurchboston.org or send an email to office@firstchurchboston.org. Thank you.